Watts Welch will let us know about that. So I just wanted to say thank you again. I'm April Johnson. I'm the executive director of Preservation Durham, and our organization is a nonprofit organization that's committed to protecting Durham's historic resources through action, advocacy, and education. So one of our events are our People Plus Place series, where we um, talk about how our buildings connect to our stories, and so that we have a little bit more of an appreciation for the built environment and how they can be used as a resource for us. So I want to thank our organizing partners, the Regulator Bookshop, and I also want to thank the Museum of Durham History for helping us organize this event today. So I got all of that out. So first, I want to introduce you to, please meet Eileen Watts Welch. She is the president and CEO of the Colored Library, native of Durham, North Carolina.
Library.
The Durham, what did I say?
The Colored Library.
Oh, sorry, the Durham Colored Library. The Durham Colored Library. She's a native of Durham, North Carolina, and the great-granddaughter of great-granddaughter of Aaron McDuffie Moore.
You got it.
Also meet Blake Hill Saya. Am I saying your name right?
Got it. You got it. Good job.
She is a creative writer, a classical musician, and the great-granddaughter of Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore. Together, this aunt and niece duo pool their energies together to share their family legacy. Blake is the author of the Aaron McDuffie Moore, an African-American physician, educator, and founder of Durham's Black Wall Street. And Eileen wrote the afterword for the book. And we'll talk more about how they collaborated to get this book out to us. So I want to thank you, both of you, so much for joining us. We're very appreciative of this. And I think this is just excellent, because I don't know if we've had anyone else to write more details and give us more information about who these people are and their backgrounds. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful read. So I want to remind the audience that we will allow question and answer period. So feel free to go ahead and put your questions into Zoom. And when you do that, when we get to that point, I will allow that time. So for Eileen, you are the president and CEO of the Durham Colored Library. Tell us a little bit about that organization and its mission.
I certainly will, but absolutely first, I want to say thank you so much too for selecting this book as one of your featured programs, and to thank the Durham History Museum for the long history that we've had with them at Durham Colored Library as well, jointly doing programs. And then of course, Regulator Bookshop. We really appreciate you carrying the book and promoting it, and especially your Christmas time promotions. So we're a real partnership here, and it's always good to have good community partners to work on any project. The organization, the Durham Colored Library, is over 100 years old. It was founded by Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore in 1913 in the basement of White Rock Church, which is the old White Rock Church, I always say, because that church building was destroyed in urban renewal. They held the people sharing their books would be of interest to many of you. James Shepard, founder of NCCU, and Moore were best friends. Shepard's father was actually the minister at White Rock Church at that point. And Shepard and Moore decided to loan their personal books to the members of the community. And they did that for about 3 years until they then moved the book loaning facility out into the community, into a building that was owned by John Merrick. So we could go on and on and on about how Durham Colored Library progressed as an organization. It's a nonprofit and continued on after the library system was integrated. Was actually the second library in the state that an African American could borrow books from in North Carolina. And so now, fast forward, in 1967, the library services were integrated, and the board of this organization decided to continue on and do projects that were meaningful to the community. And we kept with our mission. The mission is lifting up stories of African American figures, both current and historical, to create a more comprehensive picture of the American experience. And we do that. We've done it with a magazine, and this book is hugely a big part of that. We decided a long time ago, in 2013, to actually raise enough money to be able to afford to bring on a top-notch author who could carry this story forward. And Blake was the winner of the award. She won the opportunity to do this, and we're so proud of all that she's done. And I couldn't have imagined the book to be any better than it is by anybody else, because her heart is in it, as also are her capabilities. So that's our background, and you can look on our website to find out more. I think April will post that website also.
Yes.
So I won't go into more details.
And you can follow us on social media at Durham Colored Library Incorporated, at Durham Colored Library Inc. We're there. We're always talking about what we're up to. So if you're on Instagram, that's where we are. We're also on Facebook under Durham Colored Library Inc.
Thank you, Blake. Right.
Okay, so now we'll get to know a little bit more about Blake. Blake, your information says that you're a musician and creative writer. Can you tell us more about how you came to be so creative? What type of instruments do you play? How did you fall in love with this type of work?
Well, I guess the short answer to that was that I was raised by incredibly creative and brilliant parents who encouraged me to be creative in every direction that I could possibly contain or imagine. They were both in literature themselves. For a while, they were typesetters, early word processors when I was growing up. And so words were always around, reading was always around. My father actually he and I used to memorize the poetry of William Blake, for whom I am named, when I was a little kid, even though I had no idea what the nocturnal twilight was. I used to call it the mock turtle twilight. He used to love to help me memorize poetry, which later on really fed into a good part of my career as a musician. And I had some piano lessons and violin lessons, and then I decided that what I really liked to do was sing. And so I went to conservatory, both undergraduate at Oberlin Conservatory and graduate at the University of Southern California. And then I did my residency at Los Angeles Opera as an opera singer. Opera singers have residencies just like doctors. And although, well, I don't know, there might be about the same amount of blood. And just fake blood. It's all fake. And then I had a really solid and rewarding, and still to this day, career as an opera singer. I'm a dramatic soprano now. I started off not as a baby dramatic soprano, but I sing the roles like Butterfly and Tosca and Mimi and La Boheme, and I've even sung Carmen. All the sopranos can switch hit there a little bit. And lots of contemporary music and creating roles from the ground up. And I think that kind of connects into what the experience that led me to have the skills to say confidently yes to this book. I've always written. Writing has been part of the way that I express myself forever, since I have diaries going back to my 5-year-old self, mostly about dogs and horses, but very interesting.
Wow.
And
were you writing at 5 years old?
Oh yes. I had stories about all of the dogs and the horses that I could remember the names of. And so writing has always been part of me. It's just been a bit more of a private part of me. I've written for people for years. I'm the person people come to when they are stuck with their professional bio or their submission, their, college essays, etc. I was always helping people put those together. My parents, were both English professors, so I never got out of the house without a rigorously edited essay of one kind or another. And so, yeah, they had some real arguments about, my subject matter in 8th, 9th grade. And about like, what does she mean here? How do you begin this sentence? Well, this it was a writer's room. I'm an only child writer.
That's a really good skill to have, and I probably would have hired you in college to edit my papers.
Well, people still do.
Well, and
yeah, so that led me to having the skills to be ready to take on this book.
Yeah, and I was trying to find the page, but I read in here there was something I didn't know, that there was an orchestra in Durham that Aaron McDuffie Moore organized, and I can't find the page, but that was something new. I didn't know that, so I thought that's
yes. He was a great lover of classical music. His daughters both played the piano really to a concert level. His daughter Lyda Moore Merrick also was the organist at the old White Rock Church, and taught piano most of her life. And so she was a really active musician. She had nearly a master's degree in music performance and art. Went to Fisk and really even some classes in New York City at Columbia. And so she really was a lifelong musician and artist and lover of art. And I think she really inherited that from her dad and her dad's encouragement. He apparently really loved Debussy. He loved for her to play French Impressionist piano pieces like Debussy and Ravel. He really loved those. And of course, the hymns, always the hymns.
Nice. Well, let's go in and talk a little bit about the book. So Blake, how did you come to this? How did you come to decide to say, I'm ready to sit down and write about my great-great-grandfather?
This was a project that I had been hearing about for my whole life. It was kind of almost passed down, maybe on a DNA level, but certainly on an apocryphal level. My great-grandmother always talked about her father, and I knew her up until I was in high school. We are very, very fortunate that she sat down and recorded some interviews with our dear family friend, Meredith Holmes, who had the prescience to get that done in the 80s. And my mother always, who unfortunately we lost very early in her life to cancer at age 43. She was the writer in the family and really would have been who naturally would have taken this on. My grandfather, Dr. Charles Watts, as I'm sure Eileen will tell you more about, was somebody who became an expert in Dr. Moore's life and was often referred to as the expert on Dr. Moore's life in several other publications besides this one. Collected many things about him and really walked in his footsteps as in his role with Lincoln Hospital early in his career, Lincoln Community Health Center, making that something that lived beyond Lincoln Hospital's life, and also being medical director at the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, a position that Aaron McDuffie Moore founded. So he was, someone who wanted this to happen. Also, my dear grandmother, Constance Merrick Watts, also wanted this to happen. And so it's always been there. And so when it came time that this might be a possibility, I of course said, please consider me, I know I'm a first-time author, but I will figure it out because I love this, and I feel like I've always wanted to dive into this lost world, kind of like an Atlantis adventure for me, and so I was ready when the call came. Actually, on my wedding day, I found out on my wedding day that I would.
Oh wow!
The final decision was made in time for me to let her know about it on her wedding day.
Yeah. That's nice. Well, that was a nice wedding.
Yeah.
That was a nice wedding present. So
It was. It was very unexpected. It had been a long and rigorous process, and I had, done my due diligence to become a candidate, and it was a beautiful wedding present.
Yes. Well, reading the book, I have to tell you, I was tired for Dr. Moore because he was very busy, and it seems like he engaged in one thing after the other, and sometimes it seems like all at the same time. He was tireless. And so I wanted to ask you, and a lot of people don't have the pleasure of saying that, I have a relative, I have, an ancestor who was part of a Black Wall Street community in my community. So I wanted to ask you both about what was it like growing up knowing this legacy? Was there extra expectations of you? Were you encouraged, emboldened, or intimidated by your legacy? What was it like growing up, and what kind of stories did you hear?
I think Eileen gets to start this one for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I really am interested in answering this one because I actually grew up under the sort of umbrella of the family closely. And Blake was out of town a lot, but came back for vacations and that kind of thing. But way before Blake was born, my grandmother was telling me stories about Papa. And of course, I knew the house that he lived in, his second home down on Fayetteville Street. I knew his wife, my great grandmother, Cotty Moore, who died. She died when I was about 4 years old. And I think back, my grandchild, who's, just turned 5 or 6 now, she will remember me like I remember her at 4. You can remember your grandparents, especially when you're close. So my great grandmother, she was ailing then. She was always in kind of a rocking chair. She often was knitting or crocheting. She crocheted a lot. And she lived 20 years after he did. So he died in 23. Actually, she was 30 years after. She died in 1950. So though my mom did not know much about Aaron Moore, she was 3 when he passed. So putting these dates in perspective and these different ages, my grandmother always admired Papa. She talked about the things he did. They were proud of North Carolina Mutual and the entrepreneurships that were in place that they all traded with or were employed with. Papa brought cousins from down the country, as my grandmother would say, from Columbus County, who ended up living here, having their own families, and it was still a very close-knit family. These were his nephews and his nieces and his siblings in some cases. So I was kind of surrounded by that whole enclave, family enclave, in addition to going to the public schools and going to first Pearson School, Burton School, and then Hillside and Whitted School. So in the environment in the schools, people knew that I was Ms. Merrick's granddaughter because Miss Merrick had a name. She had a persona. People knew about her from church and from teaching and from the library. She actually was chair of the board of the library the Durham Colored Library at one point, and had a lot of public presence. So it was kind of like, it wasn't forced. There were things that were expected. And I think all families sort of have an expectation of the next generation to do well better than they did in some cases. But of course, we were all expected to go to college. There was never a question. Then we were all expected to do well in high school and to have families and be happy and have productive lives. So that was definitely there, but it was something that was easy to do because the modeling was there in place. Yeah. I could keep going if you want me to, but I thought I would.
Well, I mean, when you said the modeling was there, I see that in Dr. Aaron's life as well. He grew up during Reconstruction
That's right.
or maybe towards the end of it, but he got to see his cousins, his family members really succeed. They went into politics, they had other kinds of businesses. And so for him, that was normal. Um,
And there's a lot of study. I'm actually writing a proposal right now for Durham Colored Library about our Tech is for Tomorrow program, where we actually focus on the purpose of that being to show kids people who look like them being successful at things you'd like for them to do. So there's all kinds of literature discovering that and justifying that and qualifying that kind of a theory that we sort of, you're hearing that that's what we grew up with and that's what he grew up with. He was teaching when he was in a young man. Right after he learned, he taught, and he always wanted to be a teacher. So he came to Shaw to be a teacher and then got pulled into the medical school. But
Right.
teaching and education never left him all the way through his life, and modeling.
And that really, to
Yeah.
speak to your point about growing up with a certain kind of pressure, that modeling has traveled through the generations. And while I didn't grow up in Durham, I grew up kind of visiting Durham, but I felt the weight and the gravitas and the expectation of that history throughout my life, for sure, because that valuing of education, that valuing of dignity and self-esteem and self-respect, and the valuing of really having a plan, having a goal, achieving, is absolutely there in this family. But I think it's less about, it really does have a component of service that I think is really important to talk about as is part of his DNA. And if this was, both as a biracial child, which is important for me to note, looking like I do in the world, and as someone who comes from this legacy, in a way, I sit in the perfect middle seat to both, dive in as an outsider, but also, utilize information as an insider, to help the audience of the book feel like both, feel from their outsider perspective that they are welcome in, but also understand that, we are bringing, the insider understanding of who he was, out. And what I really wanted to do with the book is have people feel like they've really had a visit with him.
I know I did. I felt like I knew him. I actually developed a little bit of a crush on him, on your great great grandfather.
With
Um,
first.
he just has so much drive and just you can do it attitude. It can be done attitude. Here's another question I want to ask you, Blake. In your research for the book, what did you learn about your ancestor that you did not know before, or were there any new discoveries that maybe the family weren't clear about, and we got clarity,
I think really everything that I discovered, I didn't know before, because I think so often, especially around Black history figures in that time period in which, a lot of the record keeping was handwritten, a lot of the way of preserving history was less sophisticated. We get kind of these representational portraits, kind of almost two-dimensional hero images of people, and not so much three-dimensionalness. And add to that the fact that he was a very self-deprecating person, and also a very practical person who really didn't find a lot of practicality in marketing, except when he had a cause. He was ready to go out and market a cause, but he was not marketing himself. He was, if anything, putting his own character on the line in defense of, or in service of, what he was talking about, which largely at the end of his life was education. But that being said, what I found out about him was the elements of his humanity and his warmth and his humor and his relationships that I loved. And I think the thing that what I loved finding about him, although somehow I really always knew it, is that he was a real champion for women. And that's unusual for a man of his time. This was, of course, during the period where we all think about the suffragettes working for the right to vote along with Black people, and then splitting off when it became clear that perhaps the Black male was going to get the vote before the white woman, and we have a split in intersectional feminism where Black women are left behind. And so right around this same time, to have a Black male advocate as strong as Dr. Moore was for women in careers like nursing and teaching, for women like his daughters to be as educated as they wanted to be, to marry who they wanted to marry, to have healthy and productive lives as mothers, to have healthy pregnancies and healthy children who were also then educated to the extent they could be and wanted to be. So, and then to have a wife as you know, such a fiercely equal partner as Cotty Moore was, and to have as much love between them as there was, as we can see in his letters later in life to her. So that warmth, those relationships, his advocacy for women from really almost the jump. When he was in medical school, he got the obstetrics prize, which if you think about it, this time, you know, women in childbirth were being attended to by midwives, and that was it, you know, or maybe a medicine woman of some kind, but really men were not involved in childbirth at all. And so to have him move confidently into that space is just kind of a thing that I think with our eyes may seem not as remarkable as if you put yourself in his time and realize how remarkable that truly was.
That's
You'll
right.
see-
Eileen, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I certainly agree with everything that Blake has said, especially his caring for women as far as supporting women. He came from a huge family, you must remember, of lots of cousins and siblings. He was number 8. And around what I've learned as a process of doing this book is who many of those cousins are still, and who their descendants from. And many of them, it was the matriarchal track. And I guess that often happens with the mama who's the closest to the kids, often if the men are off working, is that spirit, that kind of feeling of love and support comes from the matriarchal track. And so he was probably privileged to have that from his mother and from her siblings who were married and staying all together. And one thing, they didn't have to really worry about white supremacy so much where they were living. They could together, they had their own farms, they had their own land, they produced their own food. The only time they were faced or had to be careful about white supremacist invasion into their world would be going out for work other places or trading, but they were all taking care of each other and taking care of each other's children all the way. But the other piece that I think is very well done in the book is the piece about his founding the rural schools, or arranging for rural schools to come. And that was a campaign, that was a fundraising campaign all over the state that he conducted once he recognized the possibilities of funding to help make that happen. So of course that really means a lot to me, because somehow I got that DNA. But he made it happen. And if not for him, generations of families would not have had opportunities for education so early. And North Carolina is a standout among other states. And now we know why. So
Durham Colored Library is really carrying on that legacy in the educational initiative. So, you know,
Yeah,
Eileen in particular is carrying that torch forward for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. It's the crux of our mission. So, it kind of all ties together back to what we've learned about him. But I didn't know about the Rosenwald schools and the tie to him.
Wow.
And it's not written in their materials if you read their materials. That's the next
Oh,
thing I want to have a really strong letter written from my
yeah.
writer here,
Oh, see?
to let them know what, or, to make that aware, make them aware of the reason so many of those schools were actually founded in North Carolina.
I think one more important aspect of that matrilineal, feeling throughout, what we found with the research and also throughout his life is that definitely harkens back to his Native American ancestry. That is a distinctly Native American indigenous people's way of being is this matrilineal, matriarchal, and then interwoven community aspect where the community serves each other. That's very much at the heart of his DNA and of his upbringing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, you brought up his Native American ancestry, and I didn't know this. So, were you all do how how connected were they moving forward when they moved from Columbus County? Because I realized that he had a cousin who started a school
Mhm.
in the Native American
Right.
community. Yes, and what was the other someone else did
Ray
some.
White was one you talked about a little bit in your questions.
Yes.
Hmm.
Oh yes. So John Spalding was his uncle, and
Yeah.
he was the first person of color to serve as county commissioner in Bladen County, and he represented both the Black and Native American communities.
Yes.
But was that something that continued on? Do you think? I guess not in the Durham area, but back at home, was there a lot of strength in remaining connected to the Native American community?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to this day.
Right.
Oh,
Still,
really?
oh yeah. Right. There's you have to think, Edith Spalding, Edith Freeman Spalding, his grandmother was not Benjamin Spalding's Native American wife. She was his wife. And all of these kids were mixed in with her culture and her history as well, the 10 sons and their daughter. So this was a thread that went, that's why they all could stay together so well. That's why they learned from each other. Yes, they had, Baptist church there, which wasn't of the Native American typically, but they did stay in touch and they did care for each other. And there's all kinds of crossings. So it tickles me when Blake talks about being mixed. This generation, Blake's generation, says I'm mixed because of two parents who were different.
Right.
But her parents both were already mixed,
Yeah.
especially her mama and her mama's whole family. I'm mixed,
Mhm.
so to me that's a generational thing. And of course, in Blake's world, that's important to acknowledge that. But if you look at him, you see how mixed he was, and many of all of his siblings, and very mixed from April's look to
Mhm.
Blake's look were among the cousins, especially the cousins that I've met since we started on this book.
Oh, wow.
Um, so my grandmother was a little bit prudy, Lada. She was Fisk. She was an artist. She was happy to be in Durham and to have a part of that society in Durham. Um, she really didn't like to go down the country where there wasn't always running water or bathrooms inside or well lit at night. So we didn't go down very often to the country, but we met the cousins coming up, and many of the cousins came and lived with the Moores, with Cotty and Aaron, in order to get a foothold. And he gave them space to live, board, and maybe even paying them $10 a week to be able to go to NCCU and to go and work part-time or work some at the Mutual and earn some money to go to keep going with their own lives. And those are the people that I remember coming from the farms and being able to assimilate and become well-known and educated and make well-do with their lives. And I'm speaking right now about Asa Spalding, who was actually the president of North Carolina Mutual at one point. And he has a great archive about his life, and his first chapter is growing up in Columbus County. Second chapter is living with Aunt Connie and Uncle Aaron and
Nice.
Aunt Connie and going forward to be the first actuary in the Black actuary in the United States and coming back to be president.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many stories, right, Blake?
Mhm.
I think it's important also to emphasize that there is still quite a large population and community of Lumbee and Wakamasuan Native American culture and tribal influence in our family lives, and particularly in Columbus and Robeson County. And there's another large push forward for tribal recognition. Another bill was put forward just recently by our representative who joins us on the cover, was part of drafting that legislation. So it's still a very current, it's still a very current idea and campaign.
Are
And
there any?
our reunions include Waccamaw and
Oh,
Lumbee,
yeah.
right.
I was just going to ask you that too.
Every
Well,
2 years, we have these reunions of like 1,000 people.
Mhm.
Of course, we didn't have it this year. We'll hope to have it in 2 years, but we did it virtually. And it includes both kinds of heritage, right?
Yeah. The Benjamin and Edith Spalding organization is an organization, incorporated organization of family members that reach throughout the nation, massive representation, and we love and support each other wherever we find each other. It's been wonderful to meet more and more and more cousins as this book travels out into the world as well.
Now, do you have any ancestral buildings left from that time period that you can look back on in Columbus County?
The Durham Colored Libraries, the Stanford L. Warren building
Mhm.
was owned by Durham Colored Library and built by Durham Colored Library. So we call it the historical Durham Colored Library building. And that was their second building. They had branches other places, like one at McDougal Terrace and one at, so I consider that probably that between that and St. Joseph's Church, which is a place that was preserved historically because of my mama's work as having been forefront of making sure that got filed on the National Historic Registry. No,
Anything in Columbus County?
oh yeah, in Columbus County, yes. There
Okay.
are older homes. There are some older homes. They were fragile. Many of them were pine and burned, and they had fires and that. But there's some still there, yeah. And
they
people still live there, right?
Yeah, they have some significant historic initiatives as well to preserve some of the houses and to also have, they're working on a museum effort and a lot of preservation of George Henry White's history in particular. Lots of initiatives around his life, which is so important.
Yeah, one of the family members who's actually president of the Benjamin and Edith Spalding Board gave his grandmother's home to the association, and we have continued, we've brought it up to date with plumbing and electricity and a well, all kinds of things that had to be in place. And it's about ready now to be a community center. Yes, and it's named for George Henry White.
George Henry White. So is there a website that people can go to keep up to date on those efforts?
I will send you that, right.
Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about, then I'll go to questions from the audience. was I just love this, talking about Dr. Moore and his efforts to push education and rural education. And let's see, on page 84, I just highlighted it because I felt like it's still related today. He's writing, oh, I forgot, I think he's writing a letter to um, someone, I forgot now, in an effort to push education for Black people in the rural areas. He says that we fear the great majority of our people are too indifferent and too negligent regarding those matters affecting their intellectual, moral, and social welfare. And with those matters, he was talking about advocacy for improving conditions for schools. And then on 85, he goes on to say, our weakness has been we spend too much time and money in preparation for dying and expensive funerals and too little preparing for living, which is equally important. So those two statements struck me because I kind of see that still happening, that we put a lot of focus on making sure our, I forgot the sentence he did in one of the sentences. He talked about we put more emphasis on our churches, and keeping those up, improved, but we don't spend enough energy advocating for making sure that people of color are being educated properly and that our schools are in good conditions. And so just with that parallel, I wanted to ask you, what are some other cultural or political parallels that you see that he dealt with today that we're still grappling with? I mean, he dealt with, yes, in his time, that we're still grappling with today.
Oh boy, there's
So it's a lot.
almost too many parallels.
Well, whichever struck you,
right,
that struck me.
I think I often wonder what he would think of us today and what he might think of me and how we live. And but in particular, this moment in our history. And I think I think over and over again, and particularly in American history, we have come to the brink of truly moving into an enlightened and equitable society, and we have not made the deal. We have not done the work necessary. We have not gone into the uncomfortable place long enough for us to really get a foothold and prove that that works. And so that is definitely in play now as much as it was in, for instance, 1898. You know, in 1898, there was the last successful coup on American soil, which was the political coup in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, in which, you know, the party that was in favor of equality and in you know, Blacks being real citizens, true American citizens in every sense of the word, from the vote to equal rights in the economic sphere, were completely overthrown. There was a massacre, and things really flipped to the favor of those who many think lost the war in the South, but in fact won it bureaucratically, step by step from that point on. And so I think the same spirit was behind what happened on January 6th in our nation, at our nation's capital. I think the same kinds of ill-advised and misinformation inflamed senses of iniquity were in place. I think the same kind of misinformation campaign that led to it was in place. There was a very definite misinformation campaign that led to the Wilmington riot that was absolutely focused on inflaming racial tensions and inflaming the sense that if you allow things to go forward, you will be demoted from your position of dominance, and that position of dominance is born. You're born to it. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to act right to get it, and that you can prove that you can go into the people's house and, you know, defile it and still have the right to walk free. So there was very much the same kind of sentiment around it that led up to it, that precipitated it, that was poked at to get it to happen, that happened then. Luckily, not as effectively this time. And I think that there's hope in the fact that it wasn't as effective, because we don't, I think that the majority of us don't want it. I hope that that's the case, and I hope it continues to be proven to be the case. But I also think that an engaged Black voter base also proved in Georgia in particular that there is mobilization towards organization and understanding that participation is how we move forward. And so there are different elements in place that to combat the same sentiments. Those sentiments are seeming outdated to some, thank goodness, but not to all.
Yes.
And what I hope happens going forward is that we have a better conversation about what being an American is, and that isn't code for white, because that's not who we are. We might say that isn't who we are, but it's been who we are to ignore the fact that that is code for white, that the American dream is code for the white dream. And I think that now we can have a better discussion about making that dream a diverse and beautiful, and therefore infinitely more productive and hopeful dream, to be who we say we are for real this time.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're close to closing. Eileen, why should people read this book?
They should read the book for two reasons. The biggest message is there's always a way to help someone else. There's always a way to build into your life, no matter how busy you are and how much you want to do for yourself to help others. And then people should understand their heritage. They should understand more that if you just know the struggles that it took to get one step ahead from that time, you will understand you win by struggling. Go ahead and struggle. Go ahead and do your absolute best, and keep positive in mind. Keep thinking forward as he did. I think that those are the lessons of his life.
Sure.
Okay, so reading this book, I can see there are so many other topics, so many other people in your ancestry that books could be written about. Is there a project coming up next? Have you talked about what's next?
I think about what's next all the time. The biggest problem about what's next is buying myself the time to do it. That being said, I will still do it. In the spirit of Dr. Moore, I will find a way. But yes, I do have, I'm in development on a prequel to his life, and those who came before him. And I am I have some imagination around, creating a more fictional, historically informed fictional character series around Durham's Black Wall Street, particularly the women, and I suppose also, some aspects of his journey that we could explore further, and also really John Merrick could use, a similar walk with him, because he was such a dynamic and extraordinary individual with a very different road to his success and to their friendship. So I think that's another great look.
Well, thank you. That's great, and we'll be looking forward to the next book. So I'm just
years.
Here's what I want to say is that so many families, we're not the only one,
right,
that has people in their history, that have multiple people in their history who should have books written about, or at least the records should be kept. And the one thing that enabled us to be able to do this was those stories that came down and those tapes of my grandmother. You've got to preserve what you can, even if you're not going to write the book this year. but preserving what you can for future generations who want to do it. It'll be there, and using the archives to store things and maintain those kinds of records. If the North Carolina Mutual had not invested early on in archiving their history, hiring an archivist and using a floor in that building when they were still in their heyday, then that a lot of information would never have been able to come to light. So that is, and you know that from preservationist perspective. So I always say to people, ours isn't the only family. There are lots of new books coming out anyway that we're seeing, and just keep doing it, because this history has to be maintained and preserved for the next generations.
Yep, Black History Matters. Black History Month is every month, and if we don't value it, if we don't preserve it, and if we don't defend it, it will be dissolved.
And write it ourselves.
Rhetoric we may not want to be part of.
Right. Let me go ahead to I have a couple of questions here because I think people's lunch hour is ending. So Tom Miller says, so many of the physical, and you may have already answered this question, but so many of the physical artifacts of Dr. Moore's life and time in Durham are gone now. His home, the hospital where he practiced, the church building where he worshiped, and even the cemetery where he was originally buried are gone. If we want to find reminders of his life in architecture and places in Durham today, where should we look?
Well, we neglected to say that the Mechanics and Farmers Bank building on it's Pettigrew Street, right, is still there, and that was one of the mutual office buildings as well for a while. So you can walk into that lobby, and which I've done on numerous occasions. When I'm there, I like to walk in there and imagine myself, ascending up to those offices. It's a beautiful lobby, and think of them standing around there talking. So I try to.
They've renovated it since you were here.
Well, that's not true. I walked in there.
It's not like it was the last time you saw it.
Oh well.
Yeah, they did a little renovation. Yeah,
I've been away for
bank now.
Been away for 3 years.
The area is beautiful and maintained, but the inside lobby is something we have to remember. Yeah.
That was a beautiful lobby. That being said, the building is still there, so you can walk by it. Yeah. There are still plaques on the street, right, to commemorate it.
Yes.
And so there's that at least.
I've got to get Blake back to Durham. COVID has got to clear. She's got to come back. We've been distanced, for a year and a half now, basically.
Well, I will say that Open Durham is also an amazing resource, and I know you guys partner with them a lot too. So if you want,
we own it now. We own it now.
Yeah. So Open Durham was an extraordinary resource for me to virtually move around the spaces that were there and to understand the layout of things and everything. So if you want to really dive into walking around Durham's Hayti, it's there on the Open Durham site and beautifully maintained and beautifully researched. So that's a great resource as well.
Yeah.
Councilperson Deidreana Freeman said, thank you so much, Eileen, for sharing so much. She has to jump off. She has another meeting, but she wanted to say that real quick. Thank you so much, Deidreana. Nicholas Levy, he is our vice president of Preservation Durham's board. He also chairs the Open Durham website. His question is, hard to pick a favorite in such a rich book, but I adore chapter 12, Not a Root Doctor, about him establishing himself in 1890s Durham. It's based on this incredible source, a daily visiting book that documents how busy he was, how great the need for care was in the growing community, how many lives he touched. Can you speak about working with that source and what it means?
Well, I just need to say that finding that source was maybe one of our greatest moments of research. I don't know, falling in love with research all over again. But it was really an archaeological find for us in a way that was really stunning and will stay with us, I think, as a team forever. I had, found something that seemed like it might be interesting in C.C. Spalding's papers that was just labeled Aaron's book. And I wondered which Aaron and why. And so Eileen was kind enough to set aside some time to go and look at that box of papers at Duke. And sorry.
Again, I had looked at it 3 times and missed it. She found it online.
So yes, it was a lot of time that she had to set aside, which I was very grateful for, and to go and do that. And Eileen, why don't you say what it was like to find it and realize what it was?
It's this little file that's shorter than the rest of the files. And the tab does say Aaron's book, but doesn't say what. So you really have to pull the rest of the papers back and dig down. There's got to be something in here kind of look. And lo and behold, there's this little book, and it's like a man's address, like his pocketbook. And you open it, and it's, she said I was trying to take pictures of it, and they were so blurry because I was shivering.
Oh, wow.
But eventually I was able to scan all the pages for her on the hard copy scanner in Duke Perkins Library, and able to send that to her so she could actually, research it and delve through and look at the dates. And it was the first year of his practice.
Yes. So it's the
great
foundation of Black medicine in Durham, in a little book, in his handwriting. Like where he went, what they exchanged, whether it was money or vegetables or eggs or chickens, whether it was what illnesses he was treating, who he what he prescribed. It was just, and all in his handwriting. And you can see in the first few sections he's not very busy, but then by the end it's like covered in all kinds of notes. It just gets more and more, so you can even experience the crescendo of his practice through this book. And then just to see his handwriting on the page after page of what his life was like, which was just
and feel his fingerprints in the leather.
Wow, really?
You could feel that fingerprint impressions, and could have probably sweaty,
Yeah.
It's
hot, he's working. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Discolorations. That part of it was, I want to share with her. That's the first place we're going.
Yeah, I can't wait, because I haven't been able to hold it in my hands, but also picturing he did all of this work either on foot or on horseback.
Yeah.
A little bit later he used to ride a bicycle, but bicycles weren't around in 1888 quite yet. So or maybe they were and he didn't have one. And so it was horseback. Even he would fall asleep on the way home, and the horse knew the way home. So he was
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. Another question Nick also asked, what does Dr. Moore's interest in Haiti and setting up a Haitian White Rock Baptist Church?
I think in general, there was a moment of Black philanthropy at this time, as Black middle class neighborhoods and church conglomerates were able to form. There was this sense that the way that we become citizens of the world is to help other Black nations and places.
A missionary.
Yeah, missionary work, but not so much. It was religious on one hand, but also it was about job skills. It was about helping them to build the infrastructure that they had successfully done. So a lot of what Dr. Moore's travels around the American nation as well as into other nations was about informing them on how to set up medical clinics, how to have Bible study that also included job skills, that also included manuals for how to learn certain skills. So the center that they set up, the White Rock Baptist Church Center that they set up in Haiti, I believe still exists in some fashion. And it was, I think it was fairly successful. I think it came at a time where there was some political strife around the U.S. occupation of Haiti, and there was some issues there with missionary work getting mixed up with our occupation that people weren't finding to be so popular. So his missionary work stopped also with his declining health. He stopped traveling. He actually had another missionary trip planned with W.E.B. Du Bois that would have been the year that he died, but he couldn't go. So that was the push. It was about philanthropy, but it was about helping other Black nations have the success of building infrastructure that they'd had. Oh, lost your sound.
Sorry, I muted. There was a car going by. So David Moore asked, how can we find out more about ingenuity in the family? Indigenuity in the family.
The indigenous.
Yeah.
I think we kind of talk about that in the book, where you come from in Columbus County.
Yeah.
So David, if you haven't purchased the book, get the book. And I think they talk a great deal about where Aaron came from. Do you want to add more to that?
Sure. Just there are resources around. If you look up the Lumbee and Wakamasuan tribe in North Carolina, there's quite a lot to be found there, and quite a lot that they are involved in. You can get involved in numerous websites around that. And also, you're welcome, to find me on social media if you have specific questions. And thank you, cousin. Thanks for asking.
Yes, he did say he read the book. Okay, that's your cousin. Oh, okay. And one last question. Paulette Dillard asked, were you able to view documents from the Pope House Museum here in Raleigh? Dr. Moore and Dr. Pope were contemporaries.
Absolutely, yes. They were co-founders of the Old North State Medical Association, which was one of the first Black medical associations in the South. And they Pope was in the first class, graduating class from Leonard Medical School, and Aaron Moore and several of the classmates from that first graduating class became associates in a number of other ways, but particularly in the Old North State Medical Association. Dr. Pope's house is a wonderful resource. That is another great online resource, specifically around the historical home. And his life is a fascinating life as well. So I highly recommend looking up Dr. Manasseh T. Pope. He was an extraordinary man.
You okay? She's frozen.
Oh, are you frozen? It looks like there's a link in the chat to Regulator Bookshop's carrying of our book. We love Regulator, and that's another stop that I cannot wait to make when I get back to Durham, is to hang out at the Regulator Bookshop. Y'all are so cool.
She's back.
She's back.
Sorry about that. Okay. I think we're at, let's see here. Any more questions? I think we're done with questions. Okay, yes.
And patronize Black bookstores and independent bookstores if you possibly can, to find us. There's also a site online called bookshop.com that has a specific initiative to help out Black bookstores. So check that out as well. You can find us on bookshop.com.
And April mentioned that I would try to get books from the Durham Colored Library. Our books include a donation, and they are autographed. And you can go to the durhamcl.org website, and you can use your credit card, or you can mail in a check, and I will either mail your book or hand deliver it. So you can, if it's in Durham, I'll deliver it to you. And they do have an autograph from the author in it.
I did it. I signed them.
Right. So Nice, nice. So I have it on the screen, you all. You see the website. You have the Eileen's email address, and the mailing address. So there are multiple ways you can go visit the site. Again, Preservation Durham's information, preservationdurham.org. Catch up on next events on our social media platforms. Thank you, Blake. She talked about the regulated bookshop. That's where locally you can get your book. They may have limited in-person visits, so it might be best to purchase it online or check with them to see when they are open and how many people they're letting in. And also, I want to thank the Museum of Durham History. They have a nice outdoor exhibit available now, honoring Black people of color in Durham who have paved the way here. And so it's an outside exhibit, and that's a great thing to do since now we can't go inside. And so I seem to see, oh my gosh, there was another question. Tom was just saying he wants a signed copy. So,
and you can see my social media here on my screen, Blake_Hilsiah_author. You can also follow me on Twitter at Hilsiah.
Right. Well, if that's, I think, okay. I think that's all. We do have a quick announcement. If Nick Levy, let me see if I can make him for those who are still here, there's another community event. We just thought we'd go ahead and, wait a minute, Nick, where are you? Hold on a second. We wanted to make a quick announcement.
And speaking of Open Durham, and thank you, Nick, for this, you can definitely find the Moore House and John Merrick's house and White Rock Baptist Church, the old one, and see how it's right by the house. You can see so many things on Open Durham as well. So check that out.
All right. Thank you so much, Blake. We have two Nick Levy's here.
I think multiple people.
Now he went away.
Oh,
You got us muted.
Let's see, Nick.
I believe he's coming back.
Okay. Where did he go? Okay. Let's do it again. Okay, well, I think what he wanted to do was make an announcement about Friends of Gear Cemetery. They're having an event this Saturday on the 20th. So be on the lookout for that. If you're on our email listserv, we have that information there. And let's see, Nick is the project manager, so I wanted him. He's gone. Okay, so maybe he had a connection problem. But so Friends of Gear Cemetery is having their final event for Gear Cemetery, if you didn't know, is the first African-American cemetery here in Durham. And there are a few other of the Black Wall Street founders who are buried there. So that's just, that organization has worked on revitalizing that cemetery. It's been left unkept. It was privately owned because, of course, Black people could not be buried with white people. So they have done an incredible job educating about the importance of Black cemeteries, doing the work to clean it up and continue to honor the families there. And they have a beautiful exhibit there now. So if you go to Gear Cemetery on Colonial Street, there you could see the exhibit, and they talk about the people, the times, the things that were going on at the times, the business owners who were there. All of that kind of stuff is there. And okay, yes, he got okay. So he just wanted to talk about that and invite you to the February 20th event. All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, taking the time out of your lunch hour to be with us. And please continue to support the Colored Durham Library. Send your donations in, purchase the books, maybe donate a group of books to your child's classroom. and hopefully maybe lesson plans will come out of this. But I think it's a great
We
thing
think
to-
it's a great book for history professors on the college level to require at Duke, at NCCU, at UNC, Chapel Hill, and we're working to encourage that. I know UNC Press is encouraging that, of course. So libraries are also ordering the book. Durham County Library has copies if people would prefer that way. And our next presentation is with the Duke Library.
Nice.
And we'll be online with them on the 23rd around 5 o'clock.
Talking about research and preservation and the archives that Duke has so beautifully maintained.
Yes,
Nice.
that's the
Nice.
subject.
Well, thank you so much. It's been our honor and our pleasure to be with you today. And thank you to our audience, those who stuck it out for the extra 30 minutes, 15 minutes. And you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, April. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.